So we're going to go back down the road to Damien. Explain why your movie started out as an original screenplay and wound up as an adapted screenplay.
Please explain.
So I'd written this script. It actually has to do with just how tricky it was to convince people to make the movie. I had written this script that was the feature-length script, but no one was really kind of interested in actually sort of putting the money up for it for obvious reasons. And so the producer's idea was to take a scene from it. I actually think it's the scene that they showed a clip from here, basically sort of a 15-minute chunk of the movie. Take that, shoot it for just a little bit of money in like a single location, and use that as basically a sizzle reel, a kind of like sample of what the movie would feel like, what it would sound like, how I would direct it, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully convince people that it could not be epically boring. And so we did that. We wound up to help kind of raise attention for the film, submitted the short to Sundance, and it played there. So fast forward to now, initially we submitted the script as an original screenplay. The distributor Sony Classics had done a similar thing with a movie Frozen River that had done the short, kind of screenplay short sort of thing, and it submitted that as original. So anyway, we figured we should submit it as original, that's what it should be. And then I found out, actually purely thanks to Max's writing partner, Dan Futterman on Foxcatcher, Sony and I found out way into like the voting process that we were actually on a completely different ballot, on the adapted ballot, because I guess they decided that because the short had been shown before the feature was shown, it was adapted from the short.
Those are the rules. Those are the rules.
Those are the rules. But it's, and so then, anyway, so that's what happened. It was funny, though, because during that time, I think there was a lot of hand-wringing, and people were sort of calling me, going, you must be so pissed, you must be so angry, and, it's like, I mean, we were all a little confused, but at the same time, the idea that anyone was, like, talking about what category this movie was going to be in for Academy Awards, it's like, I'm like, this is actually the greatest problem of all time, so but that's it.
So what sort of made your project less than obvious for people to back was the drumming, right?
Yep.
Explain why that was such a problem for people, or
I think
it
was that, and it was jazz as well. I mean, certainly we had some talk early on of like, does it have to be jazz drumming? We could do the drummer, but there's so many other kinds of drumming, Damien. You can. But I think, I actually was a jazz drummer myself when I was growing up. A lot of the movie was very autobiographical, so there was never actually a question in my mind of what the world was going to be of the movie. I just sort of wrote it quickly, then revised it for a long time, but sort of initially wrote it just out of my own personal experiences, not thinking about what was going to be, makeable or not. It was just a world I knew, and but something about drumming plus jazz, plus the idea of a kind of thriller set in a music school was just not. Was not the sexiest elevator pitch, and but it was a lot of people passing until finally a couple producers, Helen Estabrook and Jason Reitman, who worked together, and then Blumhouse, they who kind of normally do the Paranormal Activity movies and do actually I'd met them through writing low-budget horror movies, so it all kind of came together. They were willing to take a gamble, and they came on board. It was their idea to do the short, and so it sort of all kind of finally came together thanks to them.
Alex, explain the process by which you and your collaborators, Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, Nicholas Giacabone, I do not know if I did that right, and Armando Bo, you all collaborated in this sort of unusual way on this.
It all begins with Alejandro. We say it began with a phone call. Alejandro called up and said, I want to try to do a film in one take. I was like, really? Okay. And he said, and it will take place in a theater. And I said, really? And he said, it's going to be a comedy. And I said, who is this? It was Alejandro. And so he had this notion, and from there, the first image that he had was a middle-aged man floating in his underwear, 3 feet off the ground, meditating, and he was like, go. So Nico and I and Armando and Alejandro would brainstorm and try to figure out what would be the sort of kinetic and frenetic energy of backstage seemed to suit the style of shooting that he and Emmanuel Chivo Lubetsky wanted to create. And from there we found the character of Regan Thompson. And so if the question I'm understanding, the process of it was Alejandro would inspire the sort of ideas and story of sort of the characters and the things he wanted to explore, which was very much about his own, where he was at the point of his life. He wanted to attack this war he was having with his ego. And we all understood that as writers, as artists.
Were you all in the same room?
No, we did a lot of Skyping, four of us. Nico and Armando were in Buenos Aires. Alejandro was in Los Angeles, and I'm in New York City. So we would Skype and share ideas, and then Nico and I would get together and do some typing, put pages down, hand in those pages, and then we'd get together, discuss them. Alejandro would talk about the shape and direction he wanted to take it, some ideas of how the scenes, he'd do his own version of them. We'd take it back and sort of go in that process until we had a draft that was finally functioning.
And you had to be aware of the logistics of what you could achieve. Did you worry about that?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge of Birdman is that when you're going to shoot in that style, is you realize that when you get to it, 95% of what you're putting on the page is going to make it to the screen, because we could never edit. And that's the scariest thing in the whole world. So watching it, you're saying, okay, here's the best job I can do editing, but one, it's a comedy. So you don't know for pace, comedy pace is so critical, you can't tell where you have to cut, but we were never going to have a chance to cut our scenes. So it's all out there on the screen, and our mistakes are up there on the screen still. There are none. There are a lot of mistakes on the screen. And we watch them, me and Nico watch them next to each other, sort of cringing, like, oh, I wish we could have had another. But I think it's almost the pimples and ugliness of it all that sort of contributes to the chaos that is...
And the energy.
And the energy that is
Yeah.
Birdman, so...
Yeah, absolutely.
That was the challenge, yeah.
And did you work with the actors to change the dialogue?
Very little, again, because Chivo and Alejandro had spent just painstaking hours choreographing the entire film. So every camera move, we laid out in Los Angeles for weeks, taped out a floor of what it was going to be. They started thinking where it was going to go. Then we got to New York and they rehearsed again. So everything was sort of meticulously choreographed. So the best we could do, there'd be lines and sort of Edward and Zach and would improve things as actors do, but all within the framework of what was there, because we couldn't add or reduce time because the camera was on its own schedule.
So Max, you wrote with Dan Futterman, who also worked with Bennett Miller on Capote, and the screenplay was developed over many, many years. Talk about how that evolution occurred and how you worked with the director on that.
Well, first of all, let me explain that I did not actually work with Dan, although we have a pretty interesting collaboration, as it were. We didn't work together. I got a phone call from my agent, and he said, I've got this amazing project, and he was also Bennett's agent. And he described it as kind of a sports movie, and I was familiar with what happened in Pennsylvania in 1996. I vaguely remembered it. And anyway, I sat down with Bennett, and I thought, oh, well, we're, interesting kind of a sports movie. And then, dawned on me that we were making kind of the mirror image of a sports movie, or the antithetical sports movie, in where you start with a gold medal and the national anthem and you work backwards from there, and come to, at the end, 3 people their lives are destroyed. So I started in 2007 and worked for about 6 months. It took really 2 or 3 months to figure out what the story was we were looking at. Bennett had collected a massive amount of information, lots of interviews with wrestlers and stories from newspapers, magazines, etc., and background on the DuPont family. And so the bulk of my time on the writing was really trying to figure out what the story was and get those characters down. And then the writer's strike happened. And I'd already been on the project for 6 months, which was longer than I was supposed to be. And then when the strike ended, Dan came on board. So, but
I'd be curious to know if your sense of what the story was is similar to what the final film's version of the story was.
Yes. I mean, first of all, we're working with a true story, so we couldn't, give it a happy ending, and as much as I would have liked to. But so you have kind of a roadmap that you're following, and really it started off as kind of the story of Mark Schultz and John DuPont, and that didn't really work, and it wasn't until we kept chipping away at it, we realized that it needed that third person there, and that's Dave Schultz. And so almost, I guess you could say, the entire movie is about Dave Schultz, and even when he's not in the scenes are about Dave Schultz. So it was critical to get all three of those characters defined and figured out to make the story work.
Thank you. So Jason, you were working closely, no, I'm at Dan now. Okay.
Jason can answer.
Dan, no, the order is slightly different in here.
I was also a night crawler.
I just want to get to American Sniper. No, I don't. That's not true. That's not true. Dan, yours is an original, and that's hard to get made in Hollywood these days, but it also seems to defy the usual rules of what people consider to be a sound screenplay structure. It's different. It's radical. Explain why.
Why it's radical, the structure of it's radical?
All the rules you're breaking.
I, like most of us, I do a lot of studio jobs, and I feel increasingly constrained by the small box that you're allowed to move in. Everything has to be explained. You need to know everything about the characters. Characters need to be redemptive. You have to like them. You go to these preview screenings, and God help you if something isn't understood. And I was just in an ornery mood, and I sat down to write a script for myself in which I just decided to break every narrative rule that I could think of. So I came up with a character who has no arc, there's no redemption, he gets rewarded for all the wrong reasons. To be honest, I didn't know if it was going to get made. I was really writing it for myself. And so it just turned out that breaking all these conventions in the setting that I put this world in, it connected. The ideas connected with the backdrop for the film.
Because you were writing also about something that we all can relate to, which is the degradation of the media, really.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a news junkie like a lot of us probably are. And I was a journalist, like Anthony was. And so I've always been interested in journalism.
And Jason.
And Jason. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, I'm obsessed with local television news. I find it, particularly in Los Angeles, I find it like kabuki theater, and the costumes and the makeup and just the narrative that they seem to follow every night. It's very formulaic, and so the Nightcrawler world, the research of that led me into the control rooms of local television news, and everything just sort of fit together.
How were you able to convince Rene Russo to play that part?
I woke up one morning and I looked over and I said, "Honey, do you want to do this part?" And she said, "What do I have to do for it?" And I said, "You just have to show up." So I wrote it for her. I mean, I'm obviously an enormous fan of her work, and the reason I wrote it for her is because her part, I felt, could have been reduced to sort of the hard-nosed businesswoman, but she brought a vulnerability and a humanity to the part that I thought was crucial. That was not on the page. So.
Thank you. Jason, you were working with a memoir by Chris Kyle, posthumously published? It was published after he died?
No.
I read that somewhere. Explain to me. No.
I went down to meet Chris in 2010. He was out of the military about 9 months, and he was a guy who was suffering a great amount of turmoil. It was evident in his eyes. It was evident in his person. You could feel it on him. And And I honestly, after meeting him, didn't know that I wanted to write the story. I didn't know that the story was finished. And I called my wife and I said, I went down to Texas to meet him, and Texas in and of itself is, I wasn't wearing boots. I was the only guy in the room with Converse on. It wasn't going well. I said, I think I'm going to come home. This guy seems really messed up. It's heavy. And I ended up sticking around till the next morning, and his wife and kids came in, and I watched him. He was 37 at the time, and I watched him try and get to his knees and to embrace his kids, and he was so physically destroyed that you felt like you were watching a 65-year-old man try and make it down to his knees. And he spread his arms to his kids, and I saw something happen in this guy, in his face, and it was a different person than I had seen in the last 24 hours. And I watched him soften, and I realized there was somebody else here. Somebody else went off to war, and this is what came back. In his wife standing there, I realized she had raised these two kids on her own. They were 4 and 6 at the time, and he had been away at war for close to 10 years. And he explained to me, basically as I was walking out the door, oh, by the way, there's going to be a book. And it kind of like the door closed on that comment as I was ushered out. But what had happened was he had met somebody over a drink, and the guy heard his stories and ended up bringing a tape recorder and put it on the bar next to him and said, tell me that story again. And so they started doing this day after day, and that became the book, was this sort of soldier's soliloquy, back home but not back. And that book came out, and it was a big success. But when the book came to us, I realized this is the voice I heard the night before. This is not the guy that I think is beneath it. And I got to learn that in the course of working on this.
So that's part of what's going on in the reaction to the movie. It's one of the most bizarre things to witness. It's almost like a Rorschach test watching the film, the ways that different people react depending on what their ideology is, what they see. Can you address that a little bit? Because it seems like a lot of people misunderstand the movie.
This book is out in the world, and so people think this is Chris Kyle, this is who he is. But as I said, the reality was that was a tape recorder that was put on a bar. This guy got home from war, and he was suffering PTSD. He had traumatic brain injuries, and this is what we created. It's unnatural for humans to take a life. And so in creating a soldier, we do certain things so that it becomes easier for them to create this character that can take a life. And much in the way the tribes did that, and painting and the dancing around the fire, it's like these people have to become something else to do this job, and especially him. But I had the fortune of working on the first draft with Chris, and watching this guy change over the course of a couple of years. And I told him, I said, I'm turning in the draft, and he said, good luck, I hope you work again. And I made a dirty joke, and I got an LOL back from the most lethal sniper in history. And I turned it in the next day, and the following day he was murdered. And I spent the next couple months with his wife, and on the phone with his wife, who revealed everything that I didn't know about this man, and everything that I wasn't able to uncover about this man, which is the healing, the softer side, the guy that pulled her out of her own darkness. And so it became this masculine-feminine thing. And as to the controversy, we know what we intended to do, and it's this is a movie about a soldier, and this is a story of all soldiers. In a way, it was exploring the archetype of the warrior, and what that cost is, what the cost is to the soldier, and what the cost is to his family.
So Anthony, what's great about the theory of everything is that it's not the usual sort of, let's tell the great story of the great man, but it's actually also about the woman who made that story possible. And it's actually based on her memoir. Why was that the story to tell, as opposed to the standard issue biopic of Stephen Hawking?
Well, it started with Stephen. He came to prominence in 1988 with his groundbreaking book, A Brief History of Time. And that book ended so memorably with the words, "Who are we? Why are we here? When we know this, it will be a triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God." And then you flip to the cover and you see that this is coming from a man who can't move and who can only speak at 4 words a minute. And he's the successor of Einstein. And I thought, wow, someone's going to make this most incredible movie about this man. But he was on record as having said he didn't welcome any investigation of his personal life at all. So the door was fairly barred. And I didn't want to make a movie just about the publicly known facts. There probably wasn't enough in there. But in 2004, I read Jane Hawking's book, and this was an extremely candid insight into the personal life and their joint struggle to refuse to be to refuse to let Stephen be silenced by this brutal disease. And I thought at that moment, I have to do something I've never done before. I need to be a stalker. So I got on a train and I went down to see her in Cambridge, where she was still living, and appeared at her door as a stranger, basically. And I said, "Don't be afraid. I just want to make a movie about your life." And it had she must have, the look of horror in her face was almost immediate. And then she invited me in, and I had this kind of naive assumption that if I was as charming as I could possibly be, I would get her signature for the book rights in that afternoon. Well, it's perhaps a measure of my charm or lack of it that it took 8 years to get her to sign on a piece of paper. But this was the entire, I think, perhaps the unique point of interest with this movie is that it's at least about the carer as it is the cared.
Well, it's just... We've seen the Stephen Hawking. We've seen Errol Morris. We've even seen Benedict Cumberbatch playing Stephen Hawking. I think Jane Hawking is important and as heroic as he is.
Sure. I mean, it's always it's the person at the side who's the footnote in history. But he himself says that he couldn't have achieved what he did without her, and it's remarkable because she married him with the certainty. She was given at least the prognosis that he would only live 2 years, and she thought, yes, I'm strong enough to do 2 years, and that was the deal in a way, and yet they went on. They had 3 children, and he extended our understanding of the universe, and she was there right through it all. But they had to make accommodations, and they had to change, and they had to break their own theories about what relationships are and how you survive in relationships. And there is no formula, and it's not simple. And they had to come up with accommodations that were almost French in their complexity. And yet they were very quintessentially English. The great Philip Larkin poem, Sexual Intercourse, was invented in 1963, sometime between the Lady Chatterley Band and the Beatles' first LP. And so they were very, very conservative 2 people, and yet the situation obliged them to be really heroic in their unorthodox approach to love and life.
Wasn't there some debate about making the movie a little sexier, actually, than it even is?
Oh, I thought it was sexy. Didn't anyone else think it was sexy? It's sexy in an understated way, in a very English way. And you can imagine, I mean, we all have imaginations. I don't think we need to go into the bedroom any more than we did.
All right. Graham, how did an American come to write the story of Alan Turing working with first-time producers?
Oh yeah, you figured it out. I'm not actually English. It's like my big secret. You are not going to believe this, but when I was a teenager, I was a tremendous computer nerd. I know that seems impossible to imagine now because I'm this really cool, like, big-time screenwriter on a stage with these guys. But that wasn't always the case. And so when I was a teenager, I went to space camp. I went to computer programming camp. My parents were like, who the fuck, like, where did you come from? And so among kind of awkward techie teenagers without a lot of friends, Alan Turing is this sort of patron saint. I mean, he's the kind of the outsider's outsider. This guy who never fit in his own time, in his own day and place for so many different reasons, but because of that, sort of saw the world in a way that no one else had. And he was always this sort of tremendous inspiration for me, and I always wanted to write about him. It always seemed like his story had been told well on the page and on the stage, but there'd never been a film about his life, and it was sort of like, if anyone's life deserved a film, it was Alan Turing's. It was so amazing to me that didn't happen. And then, of course, I moved to LA, and you call around town and you say, hey, I really want to write this movie about a gay English mathematician in the 1940s. Oh, but at the end he's going to kill himself. It's doors open for you. They're like, oh yeah, that's a big blockbuster right there. That's not what they say when you call. So I sort of thought it was just never going to be possible. And then I was at a cocktail party, and I had just moved to LA. I didn't really know anyone. I'd met Nora Grossman, one of our producers, who's my age, before briefly for a couple minutes. Didn't really know her. I'm not sure how I got invited to the party. I think she thought I was like a different Graham and like put me on the email list. But I showed up because I didn't know anyone. So I see her in the kitchen, and I go over and I said, hey, and it's Graham, the other one. Thanks for having me. And she, what's up? And she said, oh, I want to try being a movie producer, and I optioned my first book. And I said, oh my God, cheers, have one of these weird Saint Germain cocktails that you like so much. What's the book about? And she said, it's this biography of this mathematician, you've never heard of him. And I said, well, I know a little bit about math, who is it? And she said, Alan Turing. And so I totally lost my shit. And just started this like insufferable monologue, like, oh my God, I've wanted to do this since I was a kid, this is how the movie starts, this is how it ends, the whole thing, and she's like inching back, like, who is this psycho, how did he get in my kitchen? And there began weeks and then months of me begging her and her producing partner Ito to let me come on and write it on spec, because it just felt so important. It was like, this is the Alan Turing story. Like, I would have been a PA on this movie. I'm so lucky that I happened to get to be the writer.
This is... I think obsession is the theme here. I mean, everybody seems to have a very strong connection to their subjects. This is a tricky and complicated screenplay where you're weaving together various strands. You've got the mathematician, the outsider, the enigma code breaker, the guy who doesn't get along with anybody, the guy who saves millions of lives in World War II, and then what everybody complains about is that the movie spends more time with Joan Clark than with his actual homosexual activities. What kind of debate actually occurred here?
Yeah, that was a very, I mean, it's a good, I think like a lot of the people next to me here, I'm excited about the sort of debates that have happened around the Imitation Game, because they're the sort of debates that I want to be happening in culture. I want there to be big, loud, popular debates about how gays and lesbians are represented on screen. I think that's important. We're really glad that our film can be a part of that conversation. I think that, yes, we don't show Alan Turing in the act of sex in the film. And honestly, it's not like we cut it out. It never really came up. I think we wanted to show him as someone who was sort of a mathematician first and foremost. He's a mathematician who happens to be gay. He's not a gay mathematician. And that seemed really important to us. And we really thought that was sort of an important kind of cultural and social statement. And then at the same time, sort of historically speaking, I think Alan Turing fell in love once in his life with Christopher Morcom when he was a teenager, which we show in the movie. I think he never really fell in love again. It's not like there's some sort of boyfriend or something we cut out of the story. Most of the movie takes place at Bletchley Park when he was famously celibate, not by choice, but because he was a gay man at a time when that was literally illegal. I mean, he would have gotten, if he was caught, he would have been kicked out of the military. We might have lost the war. He knew what the stakes were, and so he couldn't risk it. He wrote a letter to a friend where he described Bletchley as a sexual desert, because he knew he had to keep it a secret, and he knew he couldn't get caught. So it's a debate that we're excited to be a part of, but I think historically speaking, there was no, and we really like showing his relationship with Joan. I thought that sort of non-sexual, intellectual romance was a really interesting, and she was such a fascinating character. We were so excited to get to, you could have made a movie about Joan Clark, who Keira Knightley plays in the film. I mean, she could have her own biopic. She's such a fascinating woman.
Absolutely. And how did Morton Tilden help you to make the movie work? Because, again, it's such an extraordinary amount of condensed material in one story.
Thanks. I mean, that was sort of always the goal. The movie was never intended to be like the last word on Alan Turing. The movie was intended to be the first word on Alan Turing for a new audience of people who might not know his name. I mean, this is someone who I think his name should be as well known as Newton's, as Darwin's, as Einstein's, and it's not, because he was gay and he was persecuted for it. And so, the goal of the film was always, and Morton really got this, and I love that crazy Norwegian man so much, and he really got that we were trying to make sort of a broadly accessible film to introduce new people to Alan Turing's story. I mean, I remember from my first meeting with Morton, I'd met with so many directors about the script, and he got the humor of it. Like, Morton was the first one who really realized that, like, the movie should be sort of funny. Like, there's a natural humor to Alan Turing, and he's such a funny character in some ways. And at the same time, we wanted to make a film that an audience could understand, that we wanted to sort of, as you're saying, condense what are the big concepts that Alan Turing was behind, what are his big ideas, how can we summarize those ideas for an audience, how can we sort of invite the audience into Alan's mind, how can we open up Alan's mind to a new audience. And Morton, I'd never made a film before, so it was a lot of sort of me typing and Morton being like, I can't do his Norwegian accent, but he's like, Graham is very pretty. Is no shoot. No shoot. No can shoot. Use maybe one more time. You go back, you try again. And like, so learning, I learned so much from him about sort of what you can shoot, what you can't shoot. If it was up to me, the script would just be, 300 pages of dialogue with no scene transitions or anything. Morton helped me get away from that.
So one of the things I love to do on this panel is to sort of explore how you write. So I'm going back down to Damien. What is your actual writing process? I mean, literally, are you on a computer? Are you putting cards on a bulletin board? Are you in the morning? Are you late at night? How do you write?
It's on a computer. I think what I've found the more that I've sort of written is how little a part of writing actually writing is, and so there's this kind of, and certainly a lot of writers have gotten to know him, it's sort of a similar thing. There's a little kind of a dance, whatever your instrument of writing is, whether it's the typewriter, the computer, or piece of paper, there's this sort of dance that develops between you and that in terms of when you're actually going to actually go in for the kill, when you're actually gonna actually put pen to paper. And so my writing, 90% of my writing process is me sort of sitting on couches, surfing channels, and feeling really shitty about myself, and being in pajamas and getting up and saying I'm going to write 10 pages today, and 5 p.m. rolls around and say, well, I'm going to write 10 pages tonight, or I'll write 8 pages tonight, and then midnight rolls around and say, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to wake up early tomorrow, I'm going to write 15 pages tomorrow, and this lasts for about 3 weeks before anything is written. And I used to feel, the irony is I used to feel really bad about that and feel like I was kind of, you certainly, it lowers your self-esteem, you feel like you're not contributing to society in any meaningful way. But I've sort of realized actually that's where the writing happens, actually, that every writer is different, but for me, I need to just sort of do nothing for a little bit before writing, and then when I actually kind of, I've built up either enough willpower or enough shame and self-loathing that I sit down and write, then it can happen really quickly. And
This is the Charlie Kaufman style of writing.
yeah, which is, it's actually a strangely universal, I mean, again, not speaking for other people, but it seems like it's a strangely common thing, which the only thing that made me feel better during those times would be reading accounts of other writers talking about the same thing and feeling like it's like a support network.
Alex?
Yeah, it's amazing. He might have been speaking for me because it's incredibly similar. I'll spend 8, 9 months structuring something in my mind to death, to an inch of its life, including Birdman, which seems like it might be unstructured. It's structured to an inch of its life. And so I think when I have 2 babies at home, when I'm changing a diaper or cooking dinner, or that's when the subconscious starts to work, and that's when you're doing sort of writing, and then an idea will just hit you, and you'll write it down somewhere on a piece of paper and have it, and when they pile up to the point where I think they're going to suffocate me or my wife is going to leave me because I don't do anything for a living, my process, until Nico, my co-writer, one of my co-writers on Birdman, until him, I would get to that point where I wanted to kill myself, and then I would fly to this little place in Puerto Rico, not fancy at all, but a nice view, but crappy. The shower sort of peed on you, and there was no springs in the bed. But I would go there, there's no internet, my cell phone doesn't work there, and I would tell my wife I'm going to be gone, and then in 8 or 9 days I could come back with a draft. And I always thought, well, I've committed to the money and being away from my wife, so I better come back with something, and the pressure was enough to force me into a draft of it. Fortunately, now I've met my writing partner, in Nicholas, who's so soothing when he pokes me. He's like, okay, you've been thinking long enough. How about we write a scene? I'm like, no, I can't. Okay. But just one sentence. And then all of a sudden I find myself in it. And he's wonderful that way. So that's been a change. But before that, I felt exactly what Damien said is, in a way, how I feel as well. Until I'm overwhelmed by it, and then I'm forced into it, and then I go for dear life.
Max?
Damien, it doesn't get any easier. But I mean, yeah, how do you follow that up? Yes, everything that they said is true. I happen to use a yellow legal pad and a felt pen and to do a first draft, and I found that very liberating, and I do it so fast, and I assign myself 5 pages a day. I don't care how bad it is, I just got to do it. And if I get it done in an hour, I get to celebrate the rest of the day. And then I go back and I put it onto the computer. And that is in essence kind of a rewrite already by the time I get it on there, because then it's much more formalized. And there are many times when I'll read a sentence that I can't even understand because I wrote it so fast, because I just got to get it out there. When I started writing, I would procrastinate most of the day and get to it about 2, 3 o'clock, and then write till about 8 o'clock. And about 6 or 7 years ago, I got to the point where I kept putting it off. It'd be 6 o'clock, and I'd go, well, it's cocktail time. And I got to the point where I couldn't write anymore, so I had to completely change my life and write the first thing in the morning now, without doing anything else. If I even go to the bank, I'm ruined.
Dan?
I work in stone. I try to chisel 7 to 8 tablets a day, and I let people read it after it's been bronzed. And it just works for me. Actually, I've been doing a lot of specs lately, and if I was going to clarify what everybody's been saying, for me, writing for me falls into 2 categories: when I have an idea and when I don't have an idea. And life for me is literally like 87% better when I have an idea. When I don't have an idea, I'm literally wandering around like Walter Houston in Treasure of Sierra Madre looking for gold nuggets in the desert. And it takes a long time. It can take weeks, months, years. But then when I find one, then I become passionate about it. And then it's the process that they were talking about. I do believe your subconscious is always working on it. If you have an idea or a thought or a scene or a character, even when you're not sitting in a chair, and we all do sit in chairs for long periods of time, but even when you're not sitting there, your subconscious is working on it. And I always feel like even if you take a break and you come back the next day, if it's something you're passionate about and you're thinking about, the next day, things will have been solved even incrementally that you'll continue to work on it. But I'm a workaholic. I write 7 days a week, and I do believe that, and not when I say write, I try to work 7 days a week, whether it's thinking about an idea, reading, watching TV, reading newspapers. That's gestating, I think. I mean, I've definitely, there's no question about it. I think television is a look into the id of a country in some ways, and you can get a lot of ideas if you look at it from a certain point of view. But then I pick up my chisel and my hammer and I just start working away. That's how I do it.
Jason?
I write, I too have some young pests. I have 3 kids that are under 6, so I write in coffee shops, and I'm like that guy that doesn't move from the coffee shop for 13 hours. I tend to find a song. I'll usually find a song that goes with each thing, and then I'll listen to that song literally over and over and over, just that song all day long, every day.
What was American Sniper?
There were 2 songs for American Sniper. One of them was a Moby song called The Violent Bear It Away. That's a piano, and it's very kind of sweeping. And then the other challenge was, I've never been to war. So I tried to listen to some of what they listened to, which is hard. You know, someone explained to me the difference between Tour 1 and Tour 2 and Tour 3 and Tour 4 as the difference between, you know, Aerosmith to Ozzy, to Metallica, to Hatebreed, which is like, you know, you try and listen to Hatebreed, like I challenge you to get through a song, it's bananas. I found a very dark song that, from a band called Burzum, very dark, very, just polluted my brain with it as much as I could. You know, honestly, I just tried to create as much conflict between my ears as I possibly could.
All right. Anthony?
I'm one of 7 children, and we grew up with a certain noise level, you should say. Carnivals of chaos on a daily basis, and so I find that the most conducive thing for me is noise of any description. So when I'm at home, I'll turn the radio on and the TV on, and I found that actually turning a vacuum cleaner on as well and just have it just howling in the corner, that equates to about 2.5 siblings. It's all that sort of stuff. And, you know, and I'm grateful for the big family experience, as traumatizing as it was, because it means I can do it in a coffee shop. And I wrote a lot of Theory of Everything, actually, on a train in Germany. I'm a novelist as well, and I was on a book tour, and it went on forever. And the dining cars of German trains actually are old style. They have white tablecloths, and they serve you tea, and the great vast flatlands of Germany whiz by, and you know, all of that shit is all conducive.
It's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. Go ahead, Graham.
I know, I want like this picaresque like writing experience now. That sounds so glamorous. Rather than like sitting in my pajamas at home writing. No, yeah, it's like there's inspired days and not inspired days. What I've always found interesting about the process is there seems to be no correlation whatsoever between my level of inspiration on a given day and the quality of the work that gets produced on that day. Like I keep thinking, you know, when you're most excited about it and you're like, I can fill pages of brilliant ideas, and then you look at it the next day and it's like, what was that? That's terrible. And then the days where you're like, this is pulling teeth. I hate every single word I'm typing. And then, like, that's half the imitation game. It's like you just don't know sort of what you're going to get, and you don't know how you feel about it for sort of days or weeks after. So I feel like it's always this process of, you know, just because you feel it doesn't mean it's there. Just because you're experiencing it doesn't mean that someone else will. And so it's always this process of like managing my own feelings and reminding myself that they don't mean anything.
So what are you going to do next, Graham? What's up?
Oh, I am...
The phone has been ringing.
No, I'm finishing a book. I'm a novelist too, and so I'm just putting the finishing touches on my second book, which will hopefully be out later this year, if I can really put those finishing touches on it, and then doing a pilot for HBO.
Can you talk about that?
It is with, I'm doing it with the director, Michael Mann, and so like all things that Michael does, it is very secret, and he would kill me if I told anyone what it's
He
about.
might kill you anyway.
Literally, he like would kill me, so yeah.
Okay, Anthony, are you writing another novel? What are you up to?
I got a call from George Clooney, and he said he was wanting to go back to the territory of Good Night, Good Luck, and wanted to do a journalism movie. So we're going to broach the whole subject of the phone hacking scandal, but more broadly about what we want journalism to be.
That's the Sony Hackers project, right?
Yeah, ironically, Sony Pictures are developing this project. So they've got some considerable skin in the game now.
He actually wrote an email saying, I expect this email to be hacked before all of that happened.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
Smart man.
Yeah, he called me. I was on a junket for this movie, and I was in New York, and I'd been waiting 3 weeks because he inconveniently ran off and got married. And it took 3 weeks to get this phone call, and there was about 6 people on the call, and I've been waiting and waiting for it, and it finally came through, and the great man's voice is on the line, but it's a terrible signal, and I'm hearing like 1 word in 3, and I thought I should really tell him this is not working, I can't even hear you, but I pitched the concept for the movie in this yawning silence that I presumed was my opportunity to speak, and then put down the phone thinking that must be the worst pitch that anyone's ever delivered. But he graciously, about 20 minutes later, said, "You're our guy." So,
Way to go.
Yeah.
Jason?
I was, this was being developed with Spielberg for a little bit, and he handed me another book in the middle of that called Thank You for Your Service. That's a book about a journalist followed a battalion into Iraq, and then he followed them home and their crisis when they come home, these guys with stress and dealing with the VA and the challenges that they have, and it's a national crisis that we have on our hands, and 22 of these guys, 22 veterans kill themselves every day, and so it deals with that, and hopefully we can find an element of hope in all that, and a way out of that.
Thanks. Dan, what are you working on? Mr. Gilroy.
I'm writing another spec. I'm at the early...
In stone.
In stone. It's my style. That's what I'm known for. It's going to be another independent film. I want to direct it. I want to be able to control it. It's set in L.A. because I love shooting in L.A. It's got a strong central character. It's got a world that I don't think we've seen before. It's got a lot of personal ideas in it. It sounds hideously boring.
Well, you've been rewarded for going that route. You might as well try it
right?
again.
I might as well try it again.
Exactly.
So I'm going to go that route next.
Max?
This is why I don't read the trades, because I feel so inadequate.
You were up for that job.
No, I just, I listened to everybody, Michael Mann and Spielberg and all that, and I'm going, Irving Thalberg called me. So, I don't know, I'm like, I bet everybody here is the same. They all say, oh, I'm doing this and this and that. You'll always have 12 projects that you're working on, you're pushing forward, and in some capacity, I'm working on a spec too, Dan. And, talking to directors.
What page are you on?
Alpha males.
Second draft.
This is getting interesting.
Yeah, so really, I've got a whole, full spectrum of TV and motion pictures, all racing forward.
We're a mini studio.
am writing a book of poetry.
In stone. Alex?
This is the question you went in this order for the first time. I had to go after Max. I feel like whatever I say is going to make me sound like an idiot, so nothing.
But you and your partner are partners now.
The Birdman crew, Alejandro, myself, Nico, and Armando are producing a television series, a one-hour drama for the Stars Network. Nico and I are in the writer's room right now. I'm not there right now, but I will be on Tuesday. It's called The 1%, and then I'm working on a new film, with Guillermo del Toro. So he and I are working through an idea of a personal film, more back to the Pan's Labyrinth-y parallel.
Great.
Yeah, really sweet idea he had, and called me, and I was freaked out because I love Pan's Labyrinth and I love Guillermo, and I happen to have a thing for Mexicans, obviously. So,
Indeed.
So that's what we're up to right now. Right?
Now we're going to end up on Damien.
I'm doing, I mean, the one sort of byproduct that's been nice of this year has been there was a project I was trying to get off the ground for a long time before Whiplash that finally I'm sort of, theoretically, knock on wood, going to be shooting later this year. So I'm sort of rewriting that. We're sort of in prep on that. It's a musical. It's a sort of big song and dance, Sing in the Rain type musical that I'm going to sort of hope to kind of keep pushing forward until the studio realizes they're making a giant mistake.
What's the name of it?
But until then.
What's it called?
It's called La La Land, and it's shooting here in LA, well, south of here.
All right, all. Thank you so much for being part of this great panel.